What is your hope for All Minds in, let's say, 5 years?
My hope for All Minds is ultimately just to make mental health more accessible for everybody, whether that is in therapy or not. Right? I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
pressure to do mental health related work when it's sitting in a therapist's office, but I mean, we both
Hmm.
know like that doesn't necessarily work for everybody, and like sometimes therapy is just not the right fit, but
Yeah.
everybody deserves the knowledge and the skills that you can get in therapy regardless. So
Right.
I'm really just, I guess, hopeful that through our company and through our work, more people have that. And as cliche as it sounds, like people are happier and healthier and nicer to each other. And that's pretty much it.
That's the hope, right? Yeah.
Yeah. What about
Yeah.
you? What's your hope?
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't have said it any better as far as like people just being nicer to each other when we work on our own stuff. We're not projecting all of our insecurities and fears onto everyone else. And so I hope that in 5 years, we're seeing, AllMinds journals and books and whatever products we decide to do in the future, that it's in every space, not just, obviously in mental health spaces, but that it's talked about in, right, like acting or sports or these like bigger stages in the world, and that people are not either using it to talk about why they're doing things, but more so as like, hey, look at the work that I'm doing and look at how much further someone can get if they are doing the emotional mental health work that, we're obviously trying to get people to do with our journals.
Yeah. And I think it is something that like you do have to commit time and energy to. None of these
Yeah,
things happen if you don't do anything. And so
right.
having more people build a community around that, I think is something that we've both talked about. And
Yeah.
that would be so amazing where people could come together and they could talk about the work that they're doing and receive support from others that are also on a similar path, even though it's going to look
Hmm.
different.
Exactly. Yeah. I feel like that community part is going to be so crucial for any kind of mental health work because therapist to client, right? That's only two people. And on top of that, not everyone's comfortable talking about, like, hey, this is what I did in therapy today. But on top of that, like, as therapists, it's not like we can go around and be like, my client said this today.
Yeah.
So imagine if we got to do all of that, like, intimate work with your closest friends and family or just friends in general. I feel like it's going to be a really intimate and fun thing to do rather than just between two people that are tied to this bond with like ethics and laws, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of protection around that relationship rather than just like how you and I are just talking right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is so inherently different, right? Like you are coming to somebody specifically to help you. And
Hmm.
it's very one-sided in theory,
Yeah,
at least. And so it's not like you're getting that exchange that we know humans really need from each other. So
exactly.
in like building those communities, I think will create so much stronger bonds amongst people. And
Yeah.
that has the power to do so many amazing things like in all spaces, whether it's at work or at home or in society in general and politics, which is
Yeah,
something that is really exciting.
exactly. And this kind of moves on to like my next question is, what has been your experience when a client does come and say, like, I want to know you more? Like, I wish you could be my friend, or I wish I knew more about your life. Like, how does that affect you, not only like as a person, but also as a professional?
I think it's hard, right? Because like
Yeah.
it's natural to want to know somebody, especially when it's such a vulnerable space. Like it,
Hmm.
as a client, which I have been on the other side too, I think it is like almost a little bit weird to be like, I'm being so vulnerable with you, but I like know nothing about you. But then, of course, like as the therapist, there are those ethical guidelines and those protections that are like, well, you're not supposed to be their friend, right? Like you can't be those things. So
Hmm.
I do certainly try to balance, like, I will give some information just so they know that I'm human and, have a life instead of just
Right.
like this blank wall that's just going to stare at them for 50 minutes.
Yeah.
But also trying to be intentional about like how is this actually helping them?
Yeah.
Because I don't want it to obviously become my session where I'm just talking about
Hmm.
myself for 40 minutes and then they're like, why did I come here for that?
Right.
What about for you? What do you do?
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the relationship too, right? Like there
Yeah.
are clients who do want to know a little bit about their therapist, and I try to assess the situation. I try to assess each client. There's some that I'll kind of give tidbits about, and then there's some that might know a little bit more just because it naturally comes out in conversation. But also, I think the therapist client relationship is very different from each person. And so, yeah, I can probably say there's a client or two that know quite a bit about me, but I've also been seeing them for 4 to 5 years. So,
Yeah.
how are they not going to know about my life?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
definitely feel the same. I think as the relationship gets longer, it's much
Hmm.
harder to keep like a very strict one-sidedness to the relationship
Yeah.
because it just starts to feel weird when you're just like, I've known you for years now and you know my name and my credentials. That's it. So
Exactly.
it's a tough place though.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Outside of making mental health accessible, right? We both agree that's AllMinds' mission.
Mhm.
Why are you doing this? Like having a full business, obviously taking on the hardships of being in a mental health field, on top of like figuring out a business, on top of creating something very new. Like why is Kylie doing this?
Honestly, I love the creativity aspect of it. Like while
Yeah.
I do love therapy and like what it can do for people, it's exhausting sometimes.
Hmm.
And I really was looking for like something else that I could do that would allow me to be more creative and be more flexible, but still use, the years of training and knowledge and research and all the things that I've done. Like I didn't want to just let that go. Plus, I got to work with
Yeah.
my best friend. So, you know, how could you say no to that?
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. I mean, I wish more people would venture out the way we did and create something. I think like we all inherently have a creative side to us, and I'm just really grateful that we both thought like the risk of it all wasn't big enough for our like aspirations and our dreams and what we think all minds can be someday based on, right, like all our skills and all the experience that we've had in the last few years.
Yeah, for sure. And it's fun.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exhausting.
Yeah,
Any business
definitely.
is exhausting, but it's exciting too to think that
Yeah.
all of that hard work that we've done can help so many more people than who we could see in the therapy room because obviously our time is so limited there. Like we
Hmm.
can't see everybody who might be looking for a therapist. It would be impossible. But this is something that
Yeah.
like anybody can use. And so it's like we could be almost like a therapist for anybody,
Hmm.
through these books or through the materials that we're making, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly. And therapy has a trickle effect, as you know, right? Like our clients are affected by what we do with them, or what they do on their own time, but also it changes the dynamics that they have with other people and what they have with themselves. But I always imagine when someone picks up one of our journals, in 2 to 3 seconds, they can then send it to another friend or, a family member or even like a colleague. And I think how quickly that can happen. And although therapy itself can be extremely profound work, I feel like this journal is also very profound in its own way,
Yeah.
because of the types of questions and skills that we are giving them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as we've both discussed, like we've learned a lot just creating them, like not
Hmm.
even, you know, like going through them ourselves, although that's something that we're both doing this year too, but just like
Yeah.
researching and diving deeper into some of these topics has so much like growth and potential within each of us. And
Hmm.
we are in this field. So like we're surrounded by this knowledge all the time.
Yeah.
I think it's cool that we can
Yeah.
do that, and so can anybody else now.
Right. Yeah. How do you think our journals are going to affect the mental health professional side? So not the people buying it. Well, I guess therapists can buy it, but how do you think this will help the people doing the work and seeing the clients?
I would say that my hope for that is that it makes people, well, makes people feel more empowered in therapy so that therapeutic time can shorten.
Mm-hmm.
And so for mental health practitioners, that means like we do have maybe more ability to see more clients because we know we might not have to see one client, for years and years. Not that that's a bad thing, right? Because like maybe
Mm-hmm.
that's what that person needs, and that's certainly okay. But
Yeah.
it gives people like those things that they can do outside of session to
Mm-hmm.
move along, which does make it easier on the therapist. And then the other side of it is like as the therapist, you can really get down into the work that they want and instead of spending, months just doing prep work, right? Like if I see this a lot in like trauma work, people come in
Mm-hmm.
and they're saying like I want to process my trauma, but they don't know how to recognize emotions. They don't know how to regulate emotions, right? Like all of these things. And so it's in the way that I do therapy, like I don't think that's safe then to process trauma because I'm just going to
Right.
trigger them and make them feel worse. So
Yeah.
I spend months doing that work. And then eventually I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, now we can process the trauma. And so these books will help with that too, so that we can be like, okay, we can do this because you've already worked on that or you are working on that. And I don't have
Mm-hmm.
to do so much of the psychoeducation on some of these more foundational things.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. As you were talking about that, I imagined someone showing up to a motorcycle club not knowing how to ride a bike, right? Like
Yeah.
it is that comparison of it can be dangerous and it can be really intense for a client to show up to do trauma work and not know how to do deep breathing or not know how to recognize when an emotion is coming up. Because oftentimes, right, we people do say, "Oh, I'm doing the work." And they think, oh, the work means that I cry when I feel something, right? It goes so much into identifying it, feeling it into your body, like how is this affecting my relationships with people? So I
Yeah.
feel like I do feel that it's not, it isn't helpful as therapists to kind of let people into the deep end when they really don't know how to swim.
Yeah.
And not every therapist agrees with that. Maybe they've had good situations where the client was able to swim quickly. But I feel like at least in my experience, anytime that I've kind of accidentally done that, we usually have to take a few steps back when we're in the middle of processing trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's a
Yeah.
perfect analogy too, right? Like it is like
Hmm.
throwing somebody in the deep end and being like, figure it out.
Swim.
Yep, hope you get there. Right?
Yeah.
Like this would make, not that our job as therapists would necessarily get easier because,
Hmm.
you're dealing with so many complex things happening, but it would
Exactly.
certainly make it more, I think, impactful overall.
Yes. Yes. With time comes money. I don't know if I mean, let's be vulnerable with people following us. How much do you charge a session?
So I am charging, my full rate is 125 right now. Um,
Hmm.
but I do offer a sliding scale for a lot of my clients, especially if I don't take insurance anymore. So that was
Hmm.
a recent switch where I just stopped taking it, and some of my clients who were on insurance wanted to follow me. And so,
Hmm.
you know, due to that transition, my lowest paying client is 35.
Okay. 35. We didn't get into this field because we're great at math, but guesstimating, right? $35 a week, a month,
$35 a session.
140 a month times, let's say they literally do it all year long. That turns out to be a little over 1,500. a
That's
year
math. Yep.
for therapy.
Yeah,
Our
so much,
newest
right?
subscription
Oh yeah. Go
is
ahead.
how much? The
It
pricier one?
for the whole year, it is $240.
Wow.
A little bit cheap.
So, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. So, on top of you can kind of do it on your own time, right? We have the weekly
Hmm. We
set
do.
up in our newest Trailblazer series. But on top of that, it is much cheaper to work on yourself within this journal than to go to therapy. Again, we are not disregarding therapy. We're not saying don't go to therapy. Some people out there want to pay for both, right? Just similarly to how people want to do medication and therapy, cost money. It just kind of goes to show that our journals are obviously great in a lot of aspects.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's
So,
no right or wrong way to do it.
mhm,
You can follow
exactly.
along, and like we were very intentional about the order that we were organizing each of the books for the whole year that you will be doing them so that
Yeah.
they, right, like we said with the swimming thing, that we're not throwing you into the deep end and just being like,
Hmm.
okay, tackle these really deep and intense mental health topics and see what happens. It is
Yeah,
a progression and you're building, the skills and the resources that you need to then dive into the really heavy ones.
exactly. Yeah. So we're initially helping people be in therapy without having to be in therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are a would you consider yourself like a trauma therapist, or how would you explain what you do to someone who knows nothing about therapy?
I mean, obviously, like we're both marriage and family therapists. That's
Hmm.
what our training is in.
Yeah.
So usually I start with that,
Yeah.
and a lot of people don't really know the difference between that and like other therapists or coaches or psychiatrists or like whatever is
Yeah.
out there. And so I would say for that aspect, like I really like to focus on the systems, which is of course what we were trained in, right? And the
Hmm.
idea that no individual person is the problem, right? But it's all of these other things that contribute to creating whatever the issue is that we're working with.
Hmm.
Um, as far as trauma goes, like I guess I would say that I am a trauma focused therapist. So I have been trained in a lot of the modalities for trauma, like EMDR and hypnotherapy. And I really like the somatic stuff because I think that is so connected to healing from trauma. So I do like the breath work and currently I'm doing like my yoga teacher training because I just think movement is so important.
Yeah.
Um, but I also like doing something completely different, and that's working with athletes on mental performance and
Hmm.
just learning how can our mental state and our mind impact what we're doing, right? How we're performing in athletics or performing on the stage or doing anything like that. So,
Hmm.
sum up that whole question, I would say I'm very random and do a lot of different things because I really like to learn. And so if there's ever
Yeah,
anything that somebody comes to me for and they're like, well, I'm interested in this, then I'm like, oh, I guess I'm interested in this too. And then I'll dive in and learn all about it.
definitely. Yeah, I agree. I do see you as kind of like all over the place, but in a really good way. Like when you learn something, you really learn it.
I try.
Yeah, yeah.
How would you describe what you do?
I am not as I haven't gotten into as many like certifications or different types of trainings as you have. I think I've really, since the beginning, have focused on a lot of like LGBT related therapy and just affirming people's identities, whatever that means to them. And naturally, I think I get a lot of people who don't identify as cisgender, so trans, non-binary, even on the spectrum of sexuality, asexual, pansexual, bisexual, whatever it is. Usually I get a lot of that, primarily because I do identify within the community as well. So there's a lot of like safety there. They don't have to explain certain things to me, or it's like the questions I do ask, there's already some form of understanding or experience that I've had. So I do a lot of work with clients, just kind of figuring out what their narrative is, depending on what their identity is. So if someone's non-binary, really asking them like what that means for them, how that shows up, if how they're showing up as non-binary is something they came across, or is it something that was created by society?
Mhm.
Which, as we know, most things in life are socially constructive, and I want to make sure that people feel safe to explore that, no matter what part they're in, right? From very beginning, or someone who's been transitioning and identify as trans, 10 years down the line. So, I also write a lot of letters for clients who are looking to get gender affirming surgery, or if they're trying to get like a gender dysphoria diagnosis, which is kind of an unfortunate thing that I have to do in the field, but a lot of doctors require it or insurance companies require it if they want to get surgery and or hormone therapy. So that's usually the type of people that I see. But I kind of come from like a narrative lens where I really want to know where they got their ideas from, family, friends, politics, culture, whatever it is, and making sure that that's actually what they want for their
Yeah.
life.
Yeah. That's
So
cool.
obviously keeping things like ethical and whatnot, but is there a highlight in the last few years as being a therapist that you want to share?
I have had several clients who had very, very severe childhood trauma, and not to go into like any diagnoses, but definitely some of the hardest cases that I've ever worked that really challenged me and, of course, challenged them that
Hmm.
have graduated therapy and are doing amazing things. Sometimes I'll still hear from them, months or years later, just as an update. And I think
Hmm.
that's like the most rewarding part, right? Is like when somebody who is struggling for their whole life, 20, 30, 40 years,
Yeah.
finally looking back and being like, I'm happy with who I am. And like I can take those experiences and do something that I feel good about.
Hmm.
So I've had a couple of those now. It takes
Hmm.
a long time sometimes to get there, but
Yeah.
I've had, in like the last year, I've had two, and that was amazing for me.
That's awesome. Look at you go.
I mean, it's more their work than mine ultimately, right? Because they have to show up and do the hard work, and
Yeah.
but it still is, it's like transformative as the therapist too, to see so much like power and hope that still exists within people, even after they've
Hmm.
experienced just like awful things.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a
As
highlight?
well, to bounce off of like what you were saying with how it's been a lot of their work, right? Like we're there to kind of guide them through it. I believe it was Gabor Mate, but he mentioned that the thing that makes people truly change from therapy is the therapeutic relationship. It's not really like the skills and what theories we go off of and how many years we've been doing therapy. It's usually that like safety that we create with them. And so I think the highlight of this whole career for me is just being able to sit across someone and being told you're the only person I've ever told this to, and thinking, wow, what an honor to be that person in your life. Someone that again you don't know anything about, but you still feel this like emotional safety with. I think it's inexplainable, and unless you're a mental health therapist, do people really understand that like type of vulnerability?
Yeah.
Um, because in any kind of relationship outside of therapy, like there's a good chance that that person has shared something with them, or that safety isn't as created because there's a whole relationship outside of that. But I think with clients, that's the highlight has just been to be that person for so many people. And I don't see a lot of clients, but it's just like knowing that like even 10 people a week choose to see me.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
not
And
knowing
like
that I'm kind
stay.
of annoying outside of the therapy room. I'm very like silly and stuff, and I don't show too much of that. Of course, I do sometimes, but it's just kind of cool to see that, they accept me as well.
Yeah, it is something very special and unique about the therapeutic context that
Mhm.
like these people do trust us to help them and are willing to be vulnerable, even though I'm sure we both have experienced it. Like vulnerability is scary, and
Mhm.
they do it. They show up time and again, and I agree, that is really special.
Yeah. Yeah. Very special field to be in, for
Yeah.
sure. What do you think is special about our friendship?
Um, that's, I mean, we're both very special here.
Yeah.
You know, I think like just like the level of trust that we have for each other. Yeah, going off
Mhm.
of like the therapeutic context, like there's a lot of trust and like we
Yeah.
place a lot of trust in each other to do this. Like we've certainly had our challenges. Like you moved up in the
I
middle of it
did.
and and like no matter what, I would still say like I know you could do this and I know that you are amazing at what you do. And like I mean, it really is like an honor to be able to do this with you. So, yeah, I don't know if that actually answered your question, but sort of did somewhere.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate that because I believe the same exact thing about you is like outside of marrying someone, I think starting like a business relationship with someone, there is not only a level of like trust that I have for you, but a level of respect that I don't think I have for as many people as I wish I did. I think it's just when you trust someone in this way, it's I respect what you have to say. You inspire me constantly and you bring like 90 ideas at 2 a.m. And I love that we have that like relationship where we can just talk about stuff and it's like, oh my gosh, like you feel the same way, or I can tell that we're both very passionate about what we do. And instead of just like talking about it, we've done something about it. And I don't think there's a lot of friendships out there that can say that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's taken a lot of commitment for both of us, right? Like we're still both working as therapists. So like this
Yeah.
is not something that we have even been able to commit full time to, although I know
Hmm.
that's something that we've talked about. So, like we have truly like invested in each other and in this
Yeah.
business. Like sometimes I think I talk to you more than I do talk to my spouse because it is like a whole different level of relationship that
Yeah.
is awesome because we both love it.
Yeah. And there's probably days where we need to talk to each other, but I feel like we mostly want to talk to each other. And so, based on what we know in like couples work, right, is what makes a good marriage is like friendship. But I think that that's what's made our business work well for us is that our friendship was there first before we even decided to become friends. And I know there's people out there, there's naysayers that are like, it should be the opposite.
Mhm.
But honestly, again, it makes me want to work harder because I do value the relationship so
Yeah.
much.
And I think like we were both really intentional about prioritizing our friendship over the business too,
Hmm.
which I'm sure we could hear stories about the problems with that. But
Yeah.
ultimately, like you're my friend first, and
Hmm.
that is more valuable to me than anything else. So,
Yeah.
like making sure that we spend time, not always talking about business, although I know we talk about business a lot because I do text legitimately at like 2 a.m. But like we also are able to talk about like what's happening in our lives and other things that aren't necessarily just all minds related.
Exactly. Yay for friendship.
We did it.
Yes. Yeah. How do you remember All Minds starting? Like what comes up for you when we
Me,
talk about that?
the coffee bean. Obviously, there was a specific coffee bean that we would always meet at. I don't remember why we had started meeting there in the first place. It wasn't to talk about AllMinds. It was like for something
Oh,
else. But we were sitting at the side table, and I am so extra that I, of course, take up multiple chairs between all of my bags and books that I carry. And
yes.
we started like jokingly talking about creating adult picture books that explained mental health topics because
Yeah.
like kind of like what we talked about earlier, like sometimes people don't really get what the terminology or what certain things in mental health mean. And so we were like, what better
Hmm.
way to teach people than through picture books, right? And like research in trauma shows that people process pictures much easier than they process like words. So that's why a lot of people struggle with self-help books. And so
Right.
we just started talking about all these random picture books that we wanted to make. And then we were like, should we start a business? And here we are. All minds.
Yes. Yes. And we started, and it's been great ever since because I feel like even though we didn't start off with those picture books, like we both have been like, but we're gonna go back to that.
We're
Like
gonna go
that
back to those
that's
one day.
it's gonna happen. If anyone knows about being in a business, like a lot of it has to do with money and what you can afford.
Yeah.
And right now, we're obviously learning more and more about what it means to like have money and what it means to pay for stuff. And so um I also remember, I think I remember why we started meeting there. We used to go on walks across the street at the park, and
Yes.
then we would just get coffee there. I think we were both just trying to find community because being therapists can be isolating, and
Hmm.
we both had probably just started, our careers, and it felt like, wait, yes, we're going to create, friendships with the people in our office, but we obviously went to grad school together. There was that comfort. We knew we could talk about our personal lives with each other, and so it felt like I looked to you for someone to support me through what felt like a really hard time. It was a hard time, but I try not to
Yeah.
say that because then life is like, here's another harder one. But it felt like, okay, this is obviously someone that really cares and we can trust each other and we can talk about whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And the added side benefit here is because we're both therapists, like if I think part of this too, now that I'm like really trying to think about those times, um,
Yeah.
like if we had stuff come up for clients that we weren't really sure what to do next, or like we needed maybe some advice on like, hey, like where would you take a client that was struggling with this specific thing? We could like bounce ideas off of each other for that as well, because
Mhm.
obviously that's something that you lose once you're no longer in school, right? And like
Exactly.
weird timing with 2020 and all of that stuff. So I do remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. It was helpful and not everyone has that. So if there's anything we want people to know in this field is like get friends, get community, get at least one person that you can share these like difficult moments with because obviously we can't talk about a lot of stuff with family and friends. But it's also just nice to share like emotions of like, oh, like that anger towards like very common problem that we might have as therapists or sadness or grief, which obviously comes up a lot with what we do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now we
So,
can't go on any walks because you moved.
yes, I did move to Portland, Oregon, but I'm trying to get AllMinds to blow up here too.
You could do it.
Yeah. To end our call, what made you want to become a therapist?
Honestly, like going to therapy myself. I went through a pretty difficult experience when I was like 17. Yeah, I would say like between the ages of 17 to 21 were really,
Hmm.
really, really challenging years for me in my personal life. And at some point during those years, like I had seen a therapist because I was just really struggling. And my therapist was really helpful for me. That was like exactly what I needed. And I think it took a couple tries before I found somebody that like fit with my personality and who I felt like I could connect with. But like once I did,
Yeah.
it was so helpful. Like I was there for a while and um, that was just inspiring. I've always loved mental health. I always knew I wanted to be in psychology, like from a very young age. That was kind of my
Hmm.
thing because I liked reading like psychology books when I was in middle school. I was a weird kid. It's fine. But um yeah, I saw an MFT and I felt like that was the right fit for me and what I was looking for.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's
Why
not
did
easy
you
to
get
talk
in?
about like hard stuff.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, similar to you. I had a something kind of crappy happen at a really young age and didn't come out about it until several years later. And thankfully, both my parents were very like open about therapy at the time and said, "Hey, why don't we get August into therapy?" And so I thank them for coming from a place of like caringness to have me go and talk to someone because being Mexican, there are a lot of stories about, parents being like, nope, that's for crazy people, or we'll handle it as a family, or whatever the case may be. And for me, it wasn't. And I do feel like the outlier because I was in therapy at a young age, but I'm just really grateful that I stuck with it even as a young and adult and an adult because I think that's truly why I'm kind of like kick ass because I got to work on my stuff. Like it really makes you a better person.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine who I'd be if I did not have that guidance for the last 15, 16 years of my life.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing too.
Is there anything that you want our online community to know about you?
I do have a black belt in karate. So I did that when I was younger. My parents
Wow,
were very much
I
like,
didn't even know that.
you didn't know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah. I did get my black belt and then I quit because I didn't want to do it anymore. But
Yeah.
um I just like being outside and I like reading. And that's pretty much and I like traveling. So that's me basically. Now I enjoy doing like I started doing Krav Maga, which I guess going back to my black belt days, like I don't remember anything from getting a black belt, so it wasn't helpful for me at all in Krav Maga. But doing that, and I like rock climbing and just hanging out. I'm very nerdy. I read a lot of books, so
Yes. Yes, you
so
do.
many books.
What was your favorite book you read in 2024?
Oh gosh. I mean, I recommended this one to you, so I'm just gonna recommend it to everybody. Is The Midnight
Yeah.
Library was
Hmm.
so good. It's about like exploring regret and how that shapes our life. One of my
Hmm.
favorite books for sure that I read
Yeah.
last year.
Definitely amazing book. And last thing, where's your favorite place that you've traveled to?
Scotland. Mhm.
Scotland.
Yep. I love Scotland. It's
Yeah.
beautiful, and we got to go to Loch Ness. Did not find the Loch Ness monster, but I looked. Don't you worry. And I just love the culture up there. I
Yeah.
had such a fun time. I was there for like almost a week, years ago now, but that's
Yeah.
one place that I would love to go back to in the coming years here.
Yes.
And now you get
That's
to all of
awesome.
those questions.
I'm a really big foodie. Absolutely love food. I feel like I revolve my entire life around food. And unhealthy, but in learning to be healthier in that way. And I also really love music. Big music person, constantly listening to music. I have like 60 playlists that I created on my own just based off of moods and things that are happening in my life. Big Paramore and Bad Bunny fan, probably my top two artists of all time. Um, I like traveling as well, especially now as an adult, and I have like the money and time and amazing partner to do it with. I think traveling has become a pretty big thing for me as well. So,
Do you have a
yeah.
favorite place you've been to?
Japan, which has been my only international travel so far, but I think it's going to be really hard to top, although we are trying to go to Greece this year. So I feel like they're going to be really two great places to visit, according to the people that we've talked to that travel a lot. So I'm very excited to just explore the world and see how other people operate because it, again, it just really makes you an open-minded person.
Yeah.
All
And
right. Well, thanks everyone for watching us be awkward. And we hope that
always.
you will continue following us. Please subscribe, like, and comment on our YouTube page. And don't forget to watch out for news on our new Trailblazer series.